The lamp flickered in the corner of a Roman household, casting shadows on walls that belonged to someone else. The man who tended it owned nothing, not the flame, not the oil, not even his own body. Yet Epictetus possessed something his master could never touch, something that would outlive empires and reshape how humanity understands freedom itself. Most people believe freedom means the absence of constraints. They imagine it as wide open spaces, unlimited choices, the power to do whatever they want, whenever they want it. But Epictetus learned something different in those years of bondage. He discovered that true freedom has nothing to do with external circumstances, and everything to do with internal sovereignty. This wasn't philosophy born in comfort. It was wisdom forged in the crucible of powerlessness, tested against the daily reality of having no control over the basic conditions of life. When you cannot choose where to go, what to eat, or how to spend your time, you either despair or you discover what remains unconquerable within you. Epictetus found the unconquerable. He identified 3 chambers of the mind that no external force can enter. 3 domains where even slaves remain emperors of their own experience. Understanding these chambers transforms how we navigate every constraint, every limitation, every moment when life refuses to bend to our will. The first chamber is the chamber of judgment. Here lives your power to interpret what happens to you. External events arrive as raw data, neutral, meaningless until you assign them significance. The same circumstance that destroys one person strengthens another, not because the event itself changes, but because the judgment about the event differs. Epictetus knew this intimately. When his leg was broken by a cruel master, he could have chosen the judgment of victimhood, of injustice, of hopeless suffering. Instead, he chose to see it as information about the nature of the body, temporary, fragile, not the essential self. This wasn't denial or positive thinking. It was the recognition that the meaning of an event lives in the mind that perceives it, and that mind remains free even when the body is chained. This power of interpretation extends to every area of life. The job you lose, the relationship that ends, the diagnosis you receive, the opportunity that disappears. These arrive as raw events. Their power to liberate or imprison you depends entirely on the judgments you form about them. Master this first chamber, and you discover that very little can actually harm the essential you. The second chamber is the chamber of desire. Here you decide what to want and what to reject. Most people allow their desires to be shaped by external circumstances, by what seems available or unavailable, by what others approve or disapprove. But Epictetus learned to align his desires with what naturally unfolds, rather than demanding that reality conform to his preferences. This doesn't mean becoming passive or abandoning goals. It means distinguishing between what you can influence and what you cannot, then focusing your desires only on what falls within your sphere of control. You cannot control whether other people like you, but you can control whether you act in ways worthy of respect. You cannot control outcomes, but you can control the quality of your effort. You cannot control how long you live, but you can control how fully you engage with each moment you're given. The slave who masters desire becomes freer than the master who remains enslaved to wanting what he cannot guarantee. External circumstances lose their power to disturb your peace when you stop demanding that they be different than they are. This isn't resignation. It's the strategic focusing of will on winnable battles. The third chamber is the chamber of action. Here you exercise your power to choose your response to any situation. This remains inviolate, regardless of external constraints. Even in the most limiting circumstances, you retain the freedom to act with dignity, courage, wisdom, or justice. The quality of your character cannot be touched by external force. Epictetus demonstrated this daily. Unable to control his master's commands, he controlled his attitude while following them. Unable to choose his physical circumstances, he chose his mental stance toward those circumstances. Unable to prevent suffering, he chose how to suffer, with dignity rather than bitterness, with learning rather than mere endurance. This third chamber teaches that heroism isn't reserved for dramatic moments or special circumstances. It's available in every interaction, every decision, every response to difficulty. The way you treat someone who cannot help you reveals character. How you behave when no one is watching builds freedom. What you do with disappointment shapes the person you become. These three chambers, judgment, desire, and action, form the unconquerable citadel of the self. External circumstances can restrict movement, limit resources, even cause pain, but they cannot force you to judge poorly, desire foolishly, or act without dignity. This is where true freedom lives. But Epictetus discovered something even more profound. He learned that constraints often reveal freedom rather than limiting it. When external options disappear, internal options become visible. When you cannot change circumstances, you discover your power to change your relationship with circumstances. When physical freedom is lost, mental freedom becomes accessible. The lamp burns brightest when darkness surrounds it. Similarly, inner freedom often shows itself most clearly when external freedom is restricted. This is why some of history's most liberated thinking emerged from prisons, exiles, and other forms of constraint. Not despite the limitations, but because of them. Consider how this applies to modern constraints that feel imprisoning. The job that demands too much of your time, the relationship that restricts your choices, the financial pressures that limit options, the health challenges that change capabilities. These circumstances can become either prisons or training grounds, depending on which chambers of freedom you choose to develop. The person who focuses only on external constraints remains trapped, even when those constraints disappear. But the person who develops internal freedom carries liberation with them into every circumstance. They cannot be enslaved because they understand what cannot be chained. This is the deepest teaching of Epictetus, that freedom is not something you achieve, but something you already possess. It's not granted by favorable circumstances, but discovered through mastering your response to any circumstances. The lamp of inner freedom burns regardless of external weather, because its fuel comes from within. The chains that held Epictetus eventually broke, but the freedom he discovered in slavery lasted the rest of his life. He became a teacher precisely because he had learned what could not be taught through comfort, that the human spirit remains unconquerable when it understands its own nature. Your circumstances may not be chains. That can become training grounds for the same freedom. Every constraint offers the opportunity to discover what remains free within it. Every restriction reveals aspects of liberty you may have never noticed when options seemed unlimited. The lamp still burns. Its light reveals that freedom was never about controlling external circumstances, but about mastering internal responses. What seems to limit you may be precisely what teaches you where your real power lives. If this moved you, comment "The Citadel holds" below. It is our sign that you carry the philosophy with you. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.